This is part 6 of our teaching on the principles of the Greater Exodus. And in parts 1 through 3, we went over principles and patterns that are historical, that are associated with the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the history of the nation of Israel, to see that they are types and shadows of understanding the way in which the greater Exodus is going to come about. The greater Exodus meaning the end of the exile of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the fulfillment of the prophecy in Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 15 through 28, of the two sticks, that is, northern kingdom, or Ephraim, the 10 tribes, or the house of Joseph, being united with the southern kingdom, or the house of Judah, or the Jewish people. And then in the last two parts, parts 4 and 5, we started to look at how is this going to happen? What events is it associated with? And so we saw that's associated with the nations dividing the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem through the recognition and creation of a Palestinian state based upon 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. That in doing so, the prophecies indicate that the governors of Judah, Zechariah chapter 12, verses 5 and 6, will rise up in opposition and non-acceptance to this Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. And the prophecies say in Isaiah 66, which is also given in a little bit more detail in Revelation chapter 12, that there will be a declaration of an independent state in the mountains of Israel, or Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank, with Jerusalem being designated as its capital. And this event is going to be associated with a time of great travail regarding its birth. And it's even going to look like, in Isaiah 66 verse 9, that it's not going to happen in the natural. But the God of Israel, the Messiah, is going to intervene, and he's going to back his covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he's going to bring judgment upon the nations. And central in the judgment of the nations is going to be the judgment of this end-time spiritual land, this entity that is called the daughter of Babylon in the Scriptures, whose judgment is given in great detail in Isaiah 13, Isaiah 21, Isaiah 47, Jeremiah 50, 51, Revelation in chapter 18. In that while the nations are being judged, as the daughter of Babylon is falling, he is going to redeem Jacob. And he's going to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel, and he's going to bring them back to the land. And so just as the historical Egyptian Exodus took place in the spring, and the celebration of it was Passover, that's a prophetic picture that the greater Exodus will begin, wherein the Messiah will bring his people back at a future Passover that starts the Great Tribulation. And that the duration of the greater Exodus and the return to the land, as we're shown in Revelation chapter 12, is 3.5 years, 1,260 days. That even as the children of Israel came out of Egypt and they went through the wilderness on their way to the promised land, that's a prophetic picture that his people will be exiled in the nations of the world. They are going to be in what is called in Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 33 and 34, as the wilderness of the peoples. So they're going to be taken from the wilderness of the peoples, of which the wilderness in the desert, when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, is a prophetic foreshadowing of on their way to the promised land. And so in looking at this, it is spoken of in Isaiah 66 verse 8, which says, "Who has heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day? Or shall a nation be born at once?" And so this nation in Isaiah 66 verse 8 is called Zion, as soon as Zion travail. So the nation being born in one day is Zion, and it's being born during travail, which is a term for the tribulation. And as soon as this nation is born, in the way in which it's going to be born, it's going to declare its belief in Zion, or the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, where the governors of Judah are going to rise up and declare an independent state in the mountains of Israel with Jerusalem as its capital, in non-acceptance of the nations trying to recognize and impose a Palestinian state based upon 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. That biblical Zion brings forth her children. Her children are those who believe in the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they are called in Zechariah in chapter 13, they are called the sons of Zion. And the prophecy says in Zechariah that the sons of Zion, this is actually, I said Zechariah chapter 13, it's actually Zechariah chapter 9 verse 13, that the prophecy is that the sons of Zion will be in opposition to the sons of Greece. And Esau is associated with Greece because Jacob is likened to sheep, Esau is likened to a goat. And Esau historically dwelt in Mount Seir. And there's a prophecy against Esau in Ezekiel 35. He's addressed as Mount Seir. And the way you say male goat in Hebrew is Seir. And so Esau in his name, in the place where he dwelt, is associated with a goat. So all those that follow after him are the sons of Greece. And so there are those who stand for the covenant made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There are those who oppose the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so now we have details of a prophecy that we're looking at in Revelation in chapter 5, where this woman who has a crown on her head, which means you rule and reign and have authority over, with 12 stars, that is the 12 tribes of Israel. And when Israel will be ruling and reigning in the earth over the nations, as in Messianic times, when Messiah will rule and reign and set up his kingdom and rule with Israel as the head of all nations, that in Zion being born, that it's through her birth that the Messiah is revealed to the people, and he's revealed in the hearts of his people. And it says in Revelation 12:5 that she, Zion, brought forth a man-child who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And so then in Psalm 87 verse 5 it says of Zion, it says, this and that man was born in her. And so the people are born in Zion, and they're born and they receive the Messiah in Zion. So now in Micah chapter 5 verses 2 and 3, it speaks of Bethlehem Ephratah, and there's a prophecy there that the Messiah will come out of Bethlehem. Yet out of you shall he come forth unto me that is to be ruler in Israel, that is the Messiah, whose going forth has been from old, from everlasting. And then there's a prophecy in Micah chapter 5 verse 3. He will give them up. And so the biblical expression is hiding his face. And we're told in Isaiah in chapter 8 and verse 14, Isaiah chapter 8 and verse 14, prophesying about the Messiah, it says, he shall be a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel. The prophecy is that the Messiah would be a rock of offense to both northern kingdom and southern kingdom. How's he a rock of offense to the southern kingdom? They don't accept him as the Messiah. That is Yeshua. How's he a rock of offense to the northern kingdom? Well, the northern kingdom, they are going to accept Yeshua as the Messiah, as the prophecy was in Hosea chapter 1. But they are going to stumble over following Yeshua's Torah. And then regarding the prophecy of the Messiah, in Isaiah chapter 8, verse 17, it says, I will wait upon the Lord that hides his face from the house of Jacob. I will look for him. So the prophecy about the Messiah is that he would hide his face from the house of Jacob. It means he's not going to be fully revealed to his people. And so Micah 5:3, it says, he will give them up. Biblically, he's hiding his face. He's going to hide his face until the time that she which travails has brought forth. Well, the one that's travailing in Isaiah 66 verse 8 is Zion. So he's going to give them up. He won't fully reveal himself to his people, and they won't accept him as the Messiah of the whole house of Jacob until biblical Zion is born. And then once biblical Zion is born, he's going to be born in the hearts of his people. And then the remnant of his brethren shall return to the children of Israel. That means the end of the exile. So now in Psalm 102 and verse 13, it says, you will arrive and have mercy on Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, the set time is come. And then it says in verse 16, when the Lord builds up Zion, when he builds up Zion, he will appear in his glory. Well, in the Bible, Jerusalem and Zion are synonymous terms. So the building up of Zion is the same as the building up of Jerusalem. And the building up of Jerusalem is defined in Psalm 147 verse 2 as gathering together the outcasts of Israel. So therefore, the Lord will build up Zion. He will build up Jerusalem. He will gather the outcasts of Israel. He will end the exile of the 12 tribes of Israel. And in doing so, he will appear in his glory. And the ending of the exile of his people and the Messiah returning in his glory is the sign or the banner to the nations. Isaiah 11:12. He will set up a ensign, a banner, a nasi for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. And so given that we've already seen in previous parts of this teaching that the time when we have the end of the exile and the gathering uniting the 12 tribes of Israel is a period of time that the Bible calls the day of the Lord. Specifically, the darkness of the day of the Lord, or the tribulation period of the Great Tribulation. With this foundation, with this background, we can see in context and understand what Paul was writing about in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2, where he says, now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Yeshua HaMashiach, and our gathering together unto him. What's the gathering together unto Messiah? When he ends the exile of his people. And so this is called in the prophets the day of the Lord. And who is the Lord? The Lord is Yeshua. And so the day of the Lord is the day of Yeshua. It's the day of Mashiach. It's the day of the Messiah. So in speaking of the gathering together unto him in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 1, Paul goes on to refer to that day as the day of Messiah being at hand. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 2. So as we referred to a little bit earlier, Isaiah chapter 8 verse 14, that is prophesied Messiah will be a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel. Yet it then says in verse 17, I will wait upon the Lord that hides his face from the house of Jacob. The exile is the hiding of the face. The end of the exile is the revealing of the face and causing the face to shine upon his people. And so then it goes on to say, Isaiah 8:18, behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. So the one that's a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, he dwells in Mount Zion. And then it says in Joel chapter 3 verse 16 that the Lord will roar out of Zion. So when Zion is birthed, when Zion is established, then Yeshua the Messiah will affirm his covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. and he will show himself in the sight of all nations, and he will roar like a lion. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Revelation chapter 5 and verse 5. So let's summarize what we have covered here recently in seeking to understand the events that are associated with the end of the exile of the 12 tribes and the greater Exodus, and what the Scripture has to say about that time. To begin with, number one, the nations will divide the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem by recognizing and creating a Palestinian state. Number two, in doing so, they will be dividing the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem. And this will bring about the judgment of the nations. And central in the judgment of the nations is the judgment that comes upon an end-time spiritual land of Babylon, called in the Scriptures the daughter of Babylon. And Babylon will be judged, Babylon will be destroyed. I believe this prophetically is fulfilled in the prophecies regarding the United States of America. And the primary judgment upon the nations for dividing Jerusalem is chemical, biological, and nuclear warfare. Zechariah chapter 14 and verse 12. That the tribulation period is a part of the day of the Lord. The tribulation period, also known as Jacob's trouble, Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. And the reason for the term Jacob's trouble is because there is a conflict that goes on from each generation, but it involves the whole world in the last generation between Jacob and Esau, regarding to whom the birthright and the kingship, to whom the land of Israel itself and the inheritance belongs. In the conflict between Jacob and Esau, which was personified in Genesis 32, when in Genesis 31, Jacob was given instruction to return to the land, and there he encountered Esau on his way to return to the land, that this conflict the Bible calls the controversy of Zion. And the rabbis teach that Judah, that is the southern kingdom, the Jewish people, cannot defeat Esau until Judah unites with Joseph. That is the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom, or Ephraim. Then we saw that the reason why the nations are going to be judged for dividing Jerusalem is because Jerusalem is the threshold of the God of Israel. Jerusalem is his house where he placed his name there. And he placed his name there through the Hebrew letter Shin. And if you look at the physical layout of Jerusalem, where you can see most easily from an aerial photograph, that Jerusalem is laid out with this Hebrew letter Shin, the name of God. And so he's established Jerusalem as his house. And so if you come into Jerusalem for plunder, then you're crossing his threshold. And so if you embrace the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you will be comforted. Otherwise, you will be judged. The United States, prophesied as the daughter of Babylon, will be destroyed for dividing the city of Jerusalem. And then we saw that it's prophesied, Joel chapter 3, verse 6, that Jews in the land of Israel will be forcibly removed from their homes. And then number 11, those who believe in the covenant that Yeshua made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob will be regarded by the world and viewed as the world as being outcasts. And then number 12, biblical Zion will be born during the tribulation period. And biblical Zion is an independent state that will be declared by the governors of Judah, Zechariah 12, in Judea Samaria, or the West Bank. And it will come about from the leadership in the land, the governors of Judah, who want to stand for the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and follow his Torah. And they are rejecting and rebelling against the imposition and the recognition by the nations of a Palestinian state based upon 67 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. which the nations see is the solution of the conflict between Jacob and Esau. Number 13. When biblical Zion is declared, that is the independent state in Judea, Samaria, with Jerusalem as its capital, declared by the governors of Judah, Zechariah chapter 12, verses 5 and 6, that will trigger the end of the exile of the 12 tribes of Israel. And when biblical Zion is born, the Messiah, Yeshua, will reveal himself to his people. And through the birth of biblical Zion, it's going to cause Messiah to be revealed to his people. And this event is going to bring forth the man-child, the term for the Messiah, when he is going to end the exile of the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob is born in Zion. This and that man, Jacob, that man was born in her, in Zion. Meaning, Jacob is going to give his heart to Yeshua. That is, those within Jacob who don't know Yeshua as the Messiah, and we're primarily here talking about the Jewish people. When Zion is born, and as Yeshua stands for Zion and ends the exile of Jacob. So Joseph, that is the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, or Ephraim, and Judah, will unite during the 3.5 years of the Great Tribulation period that precedes Yeshua setting his feet down on the Mount of Olives. Number 16, Yeshua will gather the exiles of Israel when he roars out of Zion. The next thing that we're going to look at is this issue about who is Jacob? Are the 12 tribes united today? And what we're going to see is that Judaism sees that the northern kingdom is separated from the southern kingdom, and the rabbis teach that only in Messianic times will the northern kingdom be united with the southern kingdom and will end their exile and return to the land of Israel through the redemptive work of King Messiah. And so, given that Judaism, or the rabbis, see that northern kingdom and southern kingdom are not united today, we can see this from the book Moses and the Original Torah by Abba Hillel Silver, where it is explained that two distinct traditions are reflected in the historical and legal writings of the Bible. One of the northern kingdom and the other of the southern kingdom of Judah. In a sense, Israel and Judah were always two separate peoples. They were never truly united, even during the period of the United Kingdom. At least during the period of the United Kingdom, they were not united in their hearts. They parted completely and forever after the days of Solomon, and when Jeroboam became the first king of the northern kingdom and Rehoboam the first king of the southern kingdom. These two people shared a common racial origin and many ancestral memories, but their historical experiences from earliest times differed sharply. So now from the book A Matter of Return by Rabbi Raphael Eisenberg on page 129 and 130, there is no consideration by the rabbis that the 12 tribes of Israel are united today. The rabbinic discussion is whether they ever will be. And so we can see the following stated in the book. There is a Talmudic dispute as to whether the 10 tribes will return to the Jewish people. Rabbi Akiva states that the 10 tribes will not return. Well, it was Rabbi Akiva in the year 135 declared Bar Kokhba, military leader of the Jewish people, in a war or rebellion against Rome, as the Messiah. And because the 10 tribes were not united with the southern kingdom in 135 at the time of Rabbi Akiva declaring Bar Kokhba as the Messiah, Rabbi Akiva therefore took the position that the 10 tribes would never return. However, according to Rabbi Eleazar. In the Talmud it says, if Rabbi Eleazar was on this side and all the other rabbis were on the other side, Rabbi Eleazar would outweigh them all. According to Rabbi Eleazar, their darkness, that is, the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, will light up for them in the future, which means that they will return. And so ultimately, the halakha is that the 10 tribes will return. The halakha is according to Rabbi Eleazar. See, there's no discussion whether they are united today. The discussion is whether they ever will be. Rabbi Akiva says no. Rabbi Eleazar says yes. And actually, the return of the 10 tribes at the time of the redemption in Messianic times is a principle of Jewish faith. It's the fourth principle of faith recorded in Mashmiah Yeshua. And so Rabbi Eisenberg goes on to explain in the book A Matter of Return on page 130 that the rabbis have determined that the halakha, or the legal ruling regarding the matter, is that the 10 tribes will return unto and be joined with the southern kingdom or the Jewish people. We can also see this viewpoint in the book Mashiach, the principles of Mashiach and Jewish law and tradition, by Rabbi Emmanuel Shohet on page 21 and 22. He writes, the 10 tribes of the northern kingdom of Israel, exiled by the Assyrians before the destruction of the first temple, as is outlined in 2 Kings chapter 17, and the rabbis teach that they were exiled beyond the river Sabbatean in the mountains of darkness, will also return. Now, in the Torah anthology to the Book of the 12 Prophets, volume 2, page 308, we see that Judaism, or the rabbis, see that the 10 tribes will only return and be joined with the Jewish people in Messianic times, which they refer to as the time of redemption, that is, the end of the exile of Jacob. So it reads, the 10 tribes who were located in very distant places will not return to the land of Israel, but only in the end of days will they return at the time of the final redemption. And so given that Judaism, or the rabbis, do not see that the 10 tribes are united with the house of Judah today, they pray daily prayers that it would be so. And these daily prayers, by which we have the prayer of the end of the exile and the gathering, uniting the 12 tribes of Israel by the Messiah, are a part of what's called the Amidah, or the standing prayers. So, in the Messiah text by Raphael Patai, page 321, he explains regarding the prayers for the coming of the Messiah. The requests for redemption, that is the end of the exile, and the coming of the Messiah, addressed to God, are part of the Amidah prayer, popularly referred to as the 18 benedictions. So the Amidah, along with the Shema, Hear, O Israel, are the most important daily prayers recited by the Jewish people that are prayed 3 times a day. And so if we look at the 10th prayer, it reads the following: blow the great shofar for our freedom, lift up a banner to gather our exiles, and gather us from the 4 corners of the earth. Blessed are you, O Lord, who gathers the banished of your people, Israel. And so this is a prayer for the end of the exile of the 12 tribes of Jacob. And the end of the exile is associated with the coming of the Messiah, because it's the role and the task and the function of the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. Now, in Rabbi Raphael Eisenberg's book, A Matter of Return, on page 130, he explains that according to Rabbi Abarbanel, The return of the 10 tribes at the time of the final redemption is one of the principles of Jewish faith. And as I mentioned earlier, it is found in Mashmia Yeshua, the fourth principle of faith. In his book, A Matter of Return, Rabbi Raphael Eisenberg, on page 132 and 133, explains that it is the viewpoint of the Jewish people of Judah that they will go and seek and look for the 10 tribes in their exile. It explained in the following way. During the past few centuries, the Jewish community in various parts of the world have made efforts to contact the lost tribes and to facilitate their return. One of these efforts was that of the Jerusalem Rabbinate of 1900, based upon a rabbinic commentary known as the Yalchut Shimoni. The Midrash states that the diaspora of Judah and Benjamin will go out to the 10 tribes exiled behind the river Sabbatean and will bring them back to the land of Israel so that they too can enjoy the days of the Messiah and the world to come. And this commentary is based upon the verse in Jeremiah chapter 3, verse 18. In those days, the house of Judah will walk with the house of Israel, and they will come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given for an inheritance to your fathers. And so then, continuing on in this explanation, that the Jerusalem Rabbinate of 1900 and seeking for the 10 tribes scattered in the nations, they wrote a letter. It was addressed to the Bnei Moshe and the 10 tribes, and it says, "Please, dear brothers, hasten and ascend to Mount Zion, the dwelling of His holiness. For our redemption," the end of the exile, "is dependent on your coming to Mount Zion." So based upon this understanding by the rabbis, by Judaism, that there'll be those of Judah that will go out and will be seeking for the 10 tribes, and those of Judah who will be doing that will be from Benjamin and Judah. We have a New Testament account where there was one that was given this commission by Yeshua the Messiah in Acts chapter 9. And this one is named Paul. And so in Philippians chapter 3, verse 5, Paul says of himself that he's from the tribe of Benjamin. And that he, in Acts chapter 22, verse 3, he studied under Gamaliel. And he learned the Torah from Gamaliel. That is, he learned rabbinic Judaism through the teachings of Gamaliel. And so he says in Acts 26, verse 5, "After the most strictest sect of our religion, I lived a Pharisee." You might say the most strictest sect today is the black hats, the black coats. They're called the ultra-Orthodox. And so in giving his testimony before King Agrippa in Acts chapter 26, Paul says that he is being judged by Judah, who wasn't going to accept him, his testimony of Yeshua, and him going out into the nations on behalf of Yeshua. He's being judged for the hope of the promise made of God unto our fathers. The promise that he goes on to say in Acts 26, verse 7, that our 12 tribes instantly serving God day and night hope to come. So if it's a promise that they hope to come, it wasn't yet realized when Paul is doing this. It was a promise that there would be an end of the exile, and northern kingdom would be united with southern kingdom, and they would return to the land of Israel. So based upon Paul's testimony in Acts chapter 26, verse 7, he said this was a promise that was made to the fathers, a promise which they hope to come. So we're going to see from Ezekiel chapter 37 that this word hope is associated with Jacob no longer being in exile. That as long as northern kingdom and southern kingdom are split from each other, then the text is going to say that their hope is lost. But their hope is in the Messiah coming, forgiving them of their sins, redeeming them, and ending their exile and gathering and uniting the 12 tribes of Israel. Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 1 through 3. The hand of the Lord was upon me, and he carried me out in the spirit of the Lord, and he set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of bones. And he caused me to pass by them round about. Behold, they were very many in the open valley, and they were very dry. And he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? Now in verse 11, it was said of him, Son of man, those bones are the whole house of Israel, meaning all 12 tribes, meaning Jacob. Behold, they say, our bones are dried, our hope is lost, we're cut off from our parts. So, to the whole house of Israel, as long as they're cut off from their parts, as long as northern kingdom is separated from southern kingdom, the prophecy says, our hope is lost. Because there's only going to be the end of the exile when northern kingdom and southern kingdom are united and return to the land through the work of the Messiah. So, given that this word hope is associated with the end of the exile and the gathering, uniting the 12 tribes of Israel, the fulfillment of the prophecy of Ezekiel 37, verses 15 through 28, Paul is testifying before the Jewish leadership in Rome the following. Acts chapter 28, verse 17. It came to pass that after 3 days, Paul called the chief of the Jews together, and when they were come together, he said to them, Men and brethren, though I have committed nothing against the people or customs of our fathers, yet was I delivered prisoner from Jerusalem into the hand of the Romans. And then he goes on to say, And when the Jews spake against it, I was constrained to appeal unto Caesar, not that I had aught to accuse my nation of. Verse 20, For this cause, therefore, have I called for you to see you and to speak with you, because for the hope of Israel I am bound with this chain. And so Paul's testimony about a promise that was made to the fathers, which they are longing to see fulfilled, is something that is not yet have happened. It is something that they hope to come. And Paul is going out, being from the tribe of Benjamin, of the southern kingdom. He is being commissioned by Yeshua to go to the nations. He's actually, if you study the prophecy, he's being commissioned to go out to the 10 tribes in exile and to proclaim Yeshua and his redemptive work through his shed blood, not only to the 10 tribes, but to all nations, anyone who would listen and receive the testimony. And so in proclamation of this message, Paul says, for that hope, he is bound by this chain. And so now, if you look at Paul and how he sees his calling, which Yeshua gave to him in Acts chapter 9, he's going to make a connection to Isaiah chapter 49, where in verse 6 it says, regarding the Messiah, that you would be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob. And so regarding the role of the Messiah to raise up the tribes of Jacob, it goes on to say in Isaiah 49:9, that you may say to the prisoners. Now the prisoners is Jacob in exile. So Jacob, scattered in the nations of the world, is in exile or is in prison. And so there's a prophecy regarding this condition in Isaiah in chapter 42. Verse 18 it says, Hear ye deaf and look ye blind, that ye may see. Who is blind but my servant, or deaf as my messenger that I send? And then it says in verse 22, But this is a people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes, and they are hid in prison houses. Then the question is asked in verse 24, Who gave Jacob for a spoil and Israel to the robbers? Did not the Lord, he against whom we have sinned? For they would not walk in his ways, neither were they obedient to his Torah. So, for breaking the covenant at Mount Sinai, Jacob was exiled in the nations of the world, and being exiled in the nations of the world, he's in a prison house because those who's taken him captive are keeping Jacob in bondage. And so when Jacob comes out of his exile, he's a prisoner that's being told to go forth. Now, this verse in Isaiah 49:9, the rabbis see as pertaining to the 10 tribes. So in the book of Matter of Return by Rabbi Raphael Eisenberg on page 132, he writes, prophesying about the future return of the exiles to their land, Isaiah states, that ye may say to the prisoners, go forth, and those who are in darkness, show yourselves. The Midrash Rabbah explains that the prisoners are the 10 tribes residing beyond the Sambatian. That is the river by which they went over and crossed in being exiled. And those who are in darkness in the exile denotes those under a dark cloud or oppression or persecution in their exile. So now in the Torah anthology to the 12 prophets, volume 1, page 190 and 191, it is explained from the book of Hosea, chapter 11, verse 10, which says, he will roar like a lion. When he roars, the children will come trembling out of the west. The commentary is that from the west is going to refer to the time of redemption, that the book of Hosea is written to the 10 tribes in their exile, that they will return from their exile and they will be coming, among other places, from the west. They'll be living in Western nations. So then, we're going to look at the Torah anthology to the book of the 12 prophets, volume 2, page 417, where we're going to see that the 10 tribes in their return will return to the land of Israel. And we're going to look at Zechariah chapter 10, verse 6. I will strengthen the house of Judah and deliver the house of Joseph. I will bring them back. I will have mercy upon them, and they will be as though I never cast them out. So the commentary, deliver the house of Joseph, this refers to the 10 tribes. I will bring them back. That is to the land of Israel. And they will dwell there in peace and security. And so when we have the end of the exile of the 12 tribes of Israel, when northern kingdom and southern kingdom are united, that the prophecy is that there will be no envy between Ephraim and Judah. And this is based upon Isaiah in chapter 11 and verse 13. So in the book of A Matter of Return by Rabbi Raphael Eisenberg on page 132, he explains, when the 10 tribes return, there will be no envy between the tribe of Judah and the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes, the house of Joseph. They will wage war against their enemies, who's primarily Esau and those with him. So we learn this from the continuation of Isaiah's prophecy. The envy also of Ephraim will depart, and they that harass the adversaries of Judah will be cut off. Ephraim will not envy Judah, and Judah will not vex Ephraim. So the next thing we're going to do in this teaching, given that we see that Judaism understands that the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom are not united today, that they will only be united in Messianic times through the work of the Messiah. When they return to the land that they were promised, where did the scriptures say that those designated places of return will be when they come from their exile? Number 1, Jerusalem. Number 2, Judea and Samaria, or the mountains of Israel. The world calls it the West Bank. Number 3, Bashan and Gilead. Number 4, Lebanon. Number 5, the southern desert of Israel called the Negev. And number 6, the area that was historically inhabited by Edom, Moab, and Ammon. So let's look at the scriptures that speak to these places. In Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 16, this is a prophecy about the judgment upon the end-time spiritual land of Babylon, the daughter of Babylon in the end of days, who I believe is the United States of America, says in Jeremiah 50, verse 16, "For fear of the oppressing sword, they will turn every one to his people, and they shall flee every one to his own land." Then it says in Jeremiah 51, verse 50, "You that have escaped the sword, go away, stand not still, remember the Lord afar off, and let Jerusalem come to your mind." And so Jerusalem is a designated place of return. Next, we're going to see that the mountains of Israel, Judea, Samaria, or the West Bank, is a designated place of return. We see this from Ezekiel chapter 37, verse 22. "And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel." Them, it's talking about the two sticks, beginning in Ezekiel 37, verse 15. That's continuing through verse 22. The two sticks becoming one. And the two sticks defined as being Ephraim, the house of Joseph and his companions, that is the northern kingdom, and then the house of Judah and his companions, the southern kingdom. Now we're going to see from Micah chapter 7, verse 14, that in their return, the 10 tribes will return to Bashan and Gilead. And so it says, "Shepherd your people with your staff, the flock of your heritage. Let them dwell alone in the wood in the midst of Carmel. Let them feed in Bashan and Gilead as in the days of old." So biblically, Bashan and Gilead is the area that is today encompasses the east side of the Jordan Valley. This would be western Jordan. That's the northern part of western Jordan that will extend into southern Syria, even encompassing the area that is called today the Golan Heights in northern Israel. The next place of return from Zechariah 10:10 is Gilead and Lebanon. The scripture says, "And I will bring them back from the land of Egypt. I will gather them from Assyria, and I will bring them to the land of Gilead and Lebanon, and even so there will not be room for them." And so the reason why it says, "I'm going to bring you from Egypt and Assyria," is because until we have the fullness of his people not being in bondage to any people or any nation on the earth, and until we have the Messiah ruling and reigning over his people in the Messianic era, wherein his people are not in exile, it is still seen they have not completed their journey out of Egypt. They've not completed their journey from being exiled by the Assyrians or by the Babylonians. So we have Gilead and Lebanon. Next, we're going to see from Obadiah. It's got one chapter, verse 20, that a designated place of return is southern Israel and what's called the Negev, the desert area of southern Israel. It says, "In the exiled hosts of the children of Israel among the Canaanim as far as Zarephath, in the exiles of Jerusalem in Sepharad." Now, Sepharad is identified as being Spain, and in the rabbinical commentary, Zarephath is primarily France, but by extension, the interpretation is it could include France and England. And so we're talking about the exiles of Israel in England, France, and Spain are prophesied, and this would probably be the Sephardic Jews will return to the desert in southern Israel. And then finally, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, which is the east side of the Jordan Valley, the east side of the Dead Sea, and it would be western Jordan, from the north to the south of western Jordan. Daniel chapter 11, verse 41. "And he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, and these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and chief of the children of Ammon." Next, in looking at the events associated with the return of the land and the designated places of return, we're going to understand and see what are the traditional readings in Judaism of the Torah and the prophets during the Sabbath of the festival of Sukkot. And the Torah portion is Exodus 33:12 through Exodus 34:26. But we're going to make special note of the reading from the prophets, which is Ezekiel 38 verse 18 through Ezekiel chapter 39 verse 16. And then the morning service and the reading from the prophets on the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles is going to be a reading from Zechariah. And so the reason why we have, during Sukkot, this reading from the prophets from Zechariah chapter 14, and then the Sabbath during Sukkot, we have the reading of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which is Gog and Magog, is because it's seen that the nations will come against Jerusalem during the time period of the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. And so if we look at Gog and Magog coming against the land, we are told in the prophecy in Ezekiel in chapter 38 in verse 8 that specifically the invasion is against the mountains of Israel. It says, "In the latter years you will come into the land that is brought back from the sword and gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel." This is repeated in Ezekiel 39 verse 2. "I will cause you to come up from the north parts, and I will bring you upon the mountains of Israel." So the Gog-Magog invasion is not of the whole land of Israel. It's specifically said to take place upon the mountains of Israel. And the mountains of Israel is biblically called Judea and Samaria. The world calls it the West Bank. And the mountains of Israel extends to Jerusalem. So we can see that the Gog-Magog invasion upon the mountains of Israel would include the West Bank and Jerusalem. So if we look at the way that the Gog-Magog coalition is judged, it parallels the way in which Pharaoh was judged in the desire of the God of Israel through Moses to deliver his people out of Egyptian bondage. And so in the Sanchino, an Orthodox Jewish published work, Midrash Rabbah, Volume 3, page 144, where it says, "Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail." And so if we look at Exodus in chapter 9 and verse 18, this is the verse that's being referred to here in the Midrash. And it goes on to say, "Such has not been in all the land of Egypt." The commentary regarding what was happening here in Exodus, that was a judgment upon Pharaoh in Egypt, the commentary is but such has not been, that is, it has not been in the past, but there will be in the future, in the days of the Gog-Magog war, as it says in Ezekiel in chapter 38 verse 22, "An overflowing shower, a great hailstone, fire and brimstone." So in looking at Ezekiel 38:18, it says, "Gog will come against the land of Israel." In the judgment upon the Gog-Magog coalition, Ezekiel 38:22, "I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and with hailstones, fire and brimstone." So you could make a comparison to the judgment upon Gog and Magog to the judgment that came upon Pharaoh and Egypt, as what happened to Pharaoh and Egypt is a prophecy of the judgment upon the nations of the end of days, and even judgment upon Gog and Magog. So In the prophecy, Ezekiel 38:39, Gog is defeated. Ezekiel 39:21, I will set my glory among the heathen, and all the heathen will see my judgment that I've executed in my hand that I've laid upon them. And then it says, when Gog Magog is defeated, then there's the prophecy of the end of the exile of Jacob and the inauguration of the uniting of northern kingdom and southern kingdom and their return to the land of Israel by the Messiah. Ezekiel 39:22. So the house of Israel will know that I am the Lord their God. They will know that who's the Lord their God? That Yeshua is the Messiah from that day forward. From what day? From the defeat of Gog and Magog. Not only will his people know who the Lord their God is, not only will the people know that Yeshua is the Messiah, but the nations will know as well. Ezekiel 39:23. And the heathen will know that the house of Israel went into captivity for their iniquity, because they trespassed against me. Therefore hid I my face from them, and gave them into the hand of their enemies. So fell they all by the sword. And so, given the principle that we've been seeing in this study, that which happens historically is prophetic, and that which happened historically allows us to understand the events associated with the greater Exodus in the end of days, we're going to see how the Gog-Magog defeat and the end of the exile was actually prophesied and foreshadowed in the Torah with the defeat of Pharaoh and his army. And we're going to see this prophetic sequence of events in the following way. Number one, that with the defeat of Gog and Magog, the Arabs will become friendly toward the exiles of Israel. And it's prophesied that they will even protect and hide the exiles of Israel. Number two, the exiles of Israel will return to their designated places, and Messiah will set up his kingdom with his people, wherein Jacob's no longer in exile. So the foreshadowing of this is the defeat of Pharaoh and his army. In Exodus, in chapter 15 and verse 4, it states the following. Exodus chapter 15 and verse 4. Pharaoh's chariots and his host has he cast in the sea. His chosen captains also are drowned in the Red Sea. So as a result of no longer being subjugated to Pharaoh, Exodus 15 verse 11, the children of Israel rejoiced with these words, and they sang, "Who is like you, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like you, glorious in holiness, fearful in praises, doing wonders?" Well, this was spoken regarding the defeat of Pharaoh and his army, but we're going to see that it's prophetic of the defeat of Gog. Who is like you? Because with the defeat of Gog and Magog, the eyes of the nations are opened up to see that Yeshua is the Messiah when he gathers his people from the nations of the world where they've been scattered to bring them back to the land of Israel. Even as Yeshua prayed in John chapter 17 verse 21, I pray that they may be one, the gathering uniting the 12 tribes of Israel, that the world would believe that you sent me. So we see then, back to Exodus 15 verse 14, the people shall hear and be afraid. Well, when the God of Israel delivered his people from Pharaoh in Egypt, through the plagues that was brought upon them, there was fear among the surrounding nations of the God of Israel and his people. And so it says in Exodus 15:14, the people will hear and be afraid. Sorrow will take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. And so there's a people today, Arabs, who are living in the land of Israel, and they want to be called Palestinians because they're claiming to be the people of historical Palestine, of which the Romans named the land Palestine after the defeat of the Jews and the rebellion by the Jews against the Romans in the first century. Then verse 15, then the dukes of Edom will be amazed, the mighty men of Moab trembling, shall take a hold upon them. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. In other words, it will break the heart and the spirit of the inhabitants of Palestinian, the dukes of Edom, and the inhabitants of Canaan, as a result of the defeat of the armies of Gog and Magog, of which the defeat of Pharaoh and his army was a prophetic foreshadowing of. So then in Exodus 15 it says, fear and dread will fall upon them. By the greatness of your arm they shall be as still as a stone. Thy people will pass over, and you will bring them in and plant them in the mountain of your inheritance. So if we look at the sequence in Exodus 15, we have the defeat of Pharaoh and his army, and then we have the melting of the hearts of the people who are enemies of the nation of Israel. The inhabitants of Palestinian will sorrow, the dukes of Edom will be amazed, and the inhabitants of Canaan shall melt away. Now the people hadn't yet, when they're coming out of Egypt, have gone into the land of Canaan. But it's prophesied that they're going to hear of it, and their hearts are going to melt, and they're going to be afraid of the God of Israel and his people, who he's just delivered from Pharaoh in Egypt, who was the greatest power of their day. So then when fear and dread falls upon them, then it says the people will pass over. Israel redeemed will pass over, and you will plant them in the mountains of your inheritance. So they literally came out of Egypt to go to the promised land, but it's a prophecy that with the defeat of Gog and Magog, that the will in the hearts of the Arab peoples, who was expressing themselves through the religion of Islam, that they will recognize that the God of Israel is the one true God, and they in their hearts will come friendly toward the exiles of Israel. And with the defeat of Gog and Magog, that the God of Israel will then begin the process of bringing his people back to the land of Israel. And when he does, the Arab peoples, Moab, will be friendly toward the exiles of Israel, and they will seek to hide them in the wilderness. And it says in Isaiah 16:1, send ye the lamb to the ruler of the land from Selah, that's Petra, that is in modern day Jordan, to the wilderness, under the mount of the daughter of Zion. So the daughters of Moab shall be at the fords of Arnon. Let my outcasts, that's the exiles of Israel, that's Zion. It says in Jeremiah 30, I will redeem you, and I will heal you of your wounds, says the Lord, because they called you an outcast, saying, this is Zion, which no man goes for. And so, let my outcast dwell with you, Moab, and in mercy shall your throne be established, and he, the Messiah, will sit upon it in truth in the tabernacle of David. So, prior to Messiah coming and setting up his kingdom, that in Petra, in Jordan, the daughters of Moab will be hiding the outcasts of Israel. That's the exiles who will be returning back to the land. And so once the exiles return back to the land, Messiah will set his feet down upon the Mount of Olives. He will set up his kingdom. He will be king over all the earth. And so in Exodus 15, verse 18, that once Pharaoh and his army was defeated and fear came upon the inhabitants of the land of Canaan and Philistia and the dukes of Edom, then he brought his people into the land of their inheritance. And it says in Exodus 15:18, the Lord will reign forever and ever. That's the prophetic picture. That's the principle. That's the pattern which we are to understand in the end of days, where it says in Zechariah 14 verse 9, after Zechariah 14:1, in the day of the Lord, that they divide Jerusalem. Verse 2, that the nations are judged. Verse 3, that Yeshua sets his feet down on the Mount of Olives. Verse 4, and verse 9, Yeshua will be king over all the earth. And that day there will be one Lord and his name one. So this is going to conclude part 6 of the teaching